excited to share with you this topic on my free video series this week about how to be a great podcast guest. If you're not already familiar with this idea, being a guest on someone else's podcast is a really powerful way to grow your credibility, come across as an expert, and also build your brand and your audience. I hadn't really thought of it previously before last fall until I saw that a number of podcasts were popping up all over the place. In collaboration threads on Facebook groups, I saw many different people asking for podcast guests, and I figured, hey, this would be a great way to market my business. Since then, I've done more than 50 interviews on podcast, radio, and even online TV shows talking about what I do in my business, how I've approached various challenges, and all aspects of running a business, whether it's helping hire digital team members or how to run a 6-figure freelancing company, and it's been a complete blast. In fact, I had so much fun as a podcast guest. I launched my own show, Better Biz Academy, and I love doing that too. We have 2 episodes that come out every single week, interviewing amazing freelancers and online business owners who are doing something outside the box. So definitely check that out if you're interested in podcasting. In my podcast-related videos here on my YouTube channel, I'll be covering various aspects of both being a podcast guest expert as well as hosting your own podcast. In this video, let's talk about how to be a great podcast guest. Now, I've seen this from both sides of the table. First of all, I've been a podcast guest numerous times on other people's shows, and some people have gone above and beyond to make it an amazing experience, and ultimately that enhances everything for the listeners because when the interviewer and the interviewee are both on the same page and having a really meaningful conversation, that translates to the audience that's listening, and that can also increase your following as well because people get interested in knowing more about you. They want to check out your website or your podcast as well. Being a great guest, though, is not simply about showing up. It's not that easy. In fact, you can do some things that actually make the hosts kind of aggravated or not looking forward to the episode as much as they otherwise might. So what are my tips for being a great podcast guest? First of all, comply with anything that they ask of you to do in advance. So for example, for someone to be a guest on my show, I need their bio, I need their headshot, and I need to know who they are before I can approve them to appear on the show. So I have people fill out an application, but other shows might not have you do that. They might just ask you to kind of pitch them directly, or you might pitch them without even being asked. But you need to have a compelling story that will resonate with their audience. This isn't about you just talking about yourself for 30 minutes or an hour. Hosts care about their listeners. So you're not only appealing to the host, but also to their audience. Who is their audience? What are the challenges that those people are facing? And how can you coming on the show help to address those different concerns that that particular audience has? So that's what I request that you do first of all, is comply with what they are asking of you to do. So if it's to apply to be on the show, follow all the guidelines for that. Submit the information in full. And then after you book, you want to make sure that it gets on your calendar as well. So a lot of podcast hosts will use booking tools. I use Calendly. People might always also use something like Schedule Once or Acuity, and that helps them to ensure that it's lined up with their calendar. This prevents all the back and forth of trying to get scheduled on somebody's show by sending emails and seeing if particular days work. So follow through with their scheduling protocol if they do have one. And then make sure when you complete the booking that you actually add that to your iCalendar or your computer or your paper planner, Google Calendar, whatever it might be, so that you don't forget. The reason I share this is because a lot of times podcast shows are booked a couple of weeks out, and it can be months before your episode goes live. So if you book a podcast recording today to be on the show in 3 weeks, your actual show might not go live for 3 months, but between now and that recording date, you might forget about it if it's not on your calendar. So make sure you've got it on your calendar. The next way to be a great podcast guest is to reach out to the host in advance and ask what you can do to help with the show. It might simply be promoting the show after they have finished recording it and have published it, but you might also want to come to the table with specific questions or things to share that are most helpful. A host really cares when you ask what you as the guest can do to make things better. It also allows the host to do their job more effectively. They can tailor their questions to what they'd like to ask you and what will be most meaningful for their audience. When you choose to be of service and offer your help in this way, there's a much greater chance that the host is going to be excited about recording the episode and willing to publicize it as much as possible when it's finished. The next thing I recommend you do to be a great podcast guest is to not talk completely about yourself. Think about the audience you are talking to. This is not your 30-minute pitch fest on somebody else's podcast. You can mention your products or services naturally when it comes up in the conversation, but the primary goal here is actually to target the host's guests. So what do they care about? Let me give you an example from my show. My show is geared toward new freelancers or emerging online business owners who are pretty early on in their journey. So anytime that somebody on my show can draw that connection between having a full-time job and transitioning to entrepreneurship, that's great for my audience because that's speaking directly to where my audience is. There's a set of pain points and concerns and challenges that audience has to overcome. So when a guest on my show chooses to talk specifically and share their story about how they've done that, it's really meaningful for my audience. So somebody coming on my show and talking about how they built a multi-million-dollar business, however, probably won't resonate with my audience. But because I make sure that my guests know who my show is for and who's actually listening, it really lines up everything perfectly for me to ask the right questions and for my guests to be able to share relevant information in line with my audience. Now, if the host at the end of the interview asks you to talk about your websites or your products, that's fine. It fits in there. But don't make the entire thing be about encouraging people to buy your latest online course. Remember, it often takes many touch points before someone's really interested in buying something from you until they feel that they've built up that trust. So there's a very small chance that someone who hears you on a podcast episode is going to run over to your website right away. The other thing to be aware of is that podcasts are coming out at a particular date, but a lot of times people are going back and binge listening. Sometimes I'm listening to episodes from 2 or 3 years ago if the content is really good. So a podcast might not be the most perfect place to pitch your offer that expires in 2 weeks. It's much better to come to the table with an evergreen offer, like an opt-in for something that the audience might be interested in that you'll always continuously have running. It's not really an effective launch strategy if you're going to open the cart for your course for 2 weeks and hope to promote it on podcasts unless that podcast has a ton of listeners who are already ready to buy. That rarely happens though. So you've got to think about podcasting as a long-term strategy, both with reaching the audience and connecting with the host. You want to do your legwork on your end to ensure that you're ready to record the show, to show up professionally, to answer all the questions, but you also want to be building that know, like, and trust relationship with the host's audience too. So present an offer that is directly in line with what you've talked about if the opportunity comes up. But don't go on the show with the primary goal of just talking about what you sell and how people can buy it. That's because people aren't likely to buy it from that initial time hearing you on someone else's show, but they may be prompted to check out your website, your podcast, or your own YouTube channel. These are just a couple of my tips to be an amazing podcast guest expert. Now, I took everything I learned from doing this process completely on my own, and I condensed it into a course that you can actually enroll in for a very low price to learn how I booked more than 45 interviews on radio shows and podcasts. You can learn more about the process that I use to do that and how I continue to book at least 8 shows a month, and how to pitch people who are hosts of podcasts. This will help you tremendously, whether you intend to become a podcast host or whether you want to pitch yourself to start appearing on other people's podcasts. It's an amazing strategy that works, and best of all, it's so cost friendly. You don't have to invest a lot of money to start pitching yourself to appear as a podcast guest. You'll have to have the necessary equipment and a really good pitch and a plan for identifying podcasts, but it works extremely well. And to be honest with you, some of the best relationships I've formed have been with the people where they've invited me to be on their podcast show. You never know who you're going to meet or the collaborations you could achieve with these individuals. So at the end of the day, it's not all about the audience and selling things. It's really about building relationships. If you feel like building relationships is the track you want to go down and you see the power of podcasting, then check out the link below to learn more about how you can begin to land podcast guests and